government operations will come to order. And without objection, the presiding member is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Good afternoon. Sorry for the wait, but it is Washington, D.C. and the House of Congress. It's a people's house, so sometimes we get a little delayed. We've had momentum over the last couple of years. I think this year, or this Congress, with the federal IT modernization effort through the passage of the MGT Act, the Modernizing Government Technology Act, we've gained strength and force. This, now a law, is bipartisan legislation that will, for the first time, reward and incentivize federal agencies and CIOs to cut costs and invest in cutting-edge technology. The effort also of modernization has gained momentum from Trump administration initiatives like establishing the Office of American Innovation, releasing an IT modernization report, and retaining good ideas from the previous administration, including the U.S. Digital Service. I am concerned, however, that in some areas we have lost momentum. We went too long without a federal CIO. I'm glad Ms. Kent is now in position and look forward to having her up here before the committee within the next few months. I'm also pleased that Ms. Weichert is in place as the Deputy Director for Management at OMB. I've spoken to my former colleague, Director Mulvaney, about our efforts here in the subcommittee and how we can work together to modernize government. He's an enthusiastic supporter of using emerging technologies to make government more efficient and accountable. We need to rethink how we structure the federal workforce to ensure the federal government has access to smart, well-trained IT and cybersecurity professionals, and be working in a bipartisan fashion, as always, in introducing a bill in the coming months to establish a U.S. Cyber Reserve's public-private sector rotational workforce. I look forward to the witnesses' thoughts on how to best organize and structure this kind of workforce. And I also continue to have concerns about long-standing GAO recommendations that remain unaddressed, oftentimes year after year after year. These open, lingering vulnerabilities put us at incredible risk, as we saw with the devastating data breaches at OPM, which is crazy to think it's almost 3 years ago. I want to hear from GAO the most critical open recommendations, and from the rest of the witnesses, concrete plans to close them. Let's use this hearing to ensure IT modernization across the federal government continues even with more force and strength in 2018. Let's not lose the momentum. And as always, it's an honor to be exploring these very important issues in a bipartisan fashion with my friend, the ranking member, the one and only, the Honorable Robin Kelly from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for calling today's hearing on the federal government's information technology. These two subcommittees have prioritized holding agencies accountable for their compliance with the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act and the effort to modernize our legacy IT systems. We have managed to work in a bipartisan manner, not only to conduct oversight, but to introduce legislation seeking to address the nation's IT and cybersecurity problems. Improving the efficiency and security of the federal government's IT system is essential to our nation's security. In order to improve the efficiency and security, we must modernize legacy IT systems across every federal agency. The federal government spends nearly $60 billion just to sustain its existing outdated IT. When agencies must spend 75% of their IT budgets merely to maintain legacy systems, they predictably fall behind in the effort to modernize. That is why the Modernizing Government Technology Act of 2017 is critical to shoring up our nation's cybersecurity and moving us forward. MGT is now law. It creates a working capital fund called the Technology Modernization Fund that will have money for efforts like cloud migration, for agency CIOs to think creatively about modernization. The next couple of months will determine whether the MGT Act is allowed to spur that type of innovation. I was pleased to see that the President's proposal budget called for $228 million for the Modernization Fund. OMB Director Mulvaney recently released a memo to agencies with guidance on MGT's implementation. The board overseeing the Modernization Fund is in place. It is now up to Congress to fund this important effort. Our government technology is too outdated to allow this opportunity to pass us by. By allocating these funds, we further our goals under FTERA to fully empower agency CIOs. I view the MGT Act as a natural complement to FTERA. We cannot speak about important efforts like moving to the cloud and data center consolidations without providing the funding necessary to make that happen. In addition to modernizing our technology, we must modernize our federal workforce to make sure they have the tools and skills necessary to address the problems of not only today, but tomorrow. In 2016, GAO found that the evolving array of cyber-based threats continue to pose a risk to our national security. The government's inability to attract and retain qualified cyber professionals throughout the government threatens our ability to address these cyber threats. Therefore, attracting IT and cybersecurity talent is critical to the safety of every American and the security of our country. I hope that our witnesses can update us on the state of the federal IT and how each agency plans to address the opportunities and challenges facing the federal government. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Kelly. And when the Ranking Member and Chair of the of Government Operations get here, we'll allow them to have opening remarks if they do. But now it's a pleasure to introduce our witnesses. Mr. David Powner, probably our most visits to this committee of anybody in government. Thanks for being here. And he is the Director of IT Management Issues at GAO. The Honorable Margaret Weichert, Deputy Director for Management at the Office of Management and Budget. Thank you for being here. Mr. Bill Zielinski, Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the IT category at the General Services Administration. And last but not least, the Honorable Jeanette Manfra, Assistant Secretary for the Office of Cybersecurity and Communications at the Department of Homeland Security. Welcome to you all, and pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before you testify, so please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. And in order to allow time for discussion, please limit your opening remarks to 4 minutes. Your entire written statement will be part of the record. And as a reminder, the clock in front of you shows the remaining time during your opening statement. The light will turn yellow when you have 30 seconds left and red when your time is up. Please also remember to press the button for the speaker. So with that, Mr. Powner, welcome back.
Chairman Hurd, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the subcommittee. I'd like to commend your subcommittee for your consistent and thorough oversight of IT and cybersecurity issues, in particular with FTARA and with recently moving the FTARA Enhancement Act and MGT. This afternoon, I'll highlight top priorities for OMB and agencies. My comments will address 3 broad areas: human capital, acquisitions, and operations. CIO authorities still need to be strengthened despite significant improvements from FTARA. Your push to elevate these positions at departments and agencies is still needed. Currently, 13 of the 24 CIOs report to the DepSec or higher. OMB plays a critical role here, especially with the recent focus on agency reorganizations. Also, cybersecurity and IT workforce needs to be further strengthened. Specifically, we still need to properly identify and tackle our workforce gaps. Properly addressing many of these needs with contractors is a critical part of the solution here. GAO has ongoing government-wide reviews looking at both the cybersecurity and IT workforce needs. Turning to improvements on major acquisitions, we still need to stay the course with major provisions in FTARA. This starts with incremental development. Your scorecard shows major progress in this area, but we still have too many projects not tackling this in manageable segments. We also need to have IT shops aware of IT contracts so that we can avoid duplication and to ensure the right governance over these acquisitions. Our recent contracting review was discouraging, as only 1/3 of the agencies had a process to approve IT contracts consistent with FTARA and OMB guidance. And of our sample of almost 100 contracts, only 10% were approved by CIOs or their designee. Strengthening the relationship between CIOs and chief acquisition officers is needed. We also believe the nation's top federal IT acquisitions should have OMB governance over them in addition to agency governance. The top acquisitions should include VA and DoD's EHR acquisitions, IRS's K2 project, SSA's Disability Case Processing System, and FAA's next-gen acquisitions. The reason these acquisitions need OMB's attention is because these agencies, left alone, haven't managed them well. The administration's attention to VA's EHR solution is spot on. We just need more of this. We have a review underway where we are identifying and profiling these most critical acquisitions. Regarding operational systems, again, we need to stay the course with FITARA. Data center optimization metrics provide great transparency on where agencies are at with their optimization metrics, and extending the sunset date from 2018 to 2020 will give agencies more time to both optimize and save. A couple key points here. Savings still can be significant as we optimize space and equipment, and the MGT working capital funds can be used to invest in unfunded priorities. Also, these agencies who can't optimize by 2020 need to get out of the data center business. We plan to report annually through 2020 on agencies' data center progress. We also believe that the nation's most critical, mission-critical legacy systems that are costly to maintain and pose significant cyber risks due to unsupported software need to be replaced with modern, secure technologies and ultimately decommissioned. OMB needs to have an active role here to ensure that these old systems like VA's VISTA system and IRS's individual master file have plans to replace and decommission. The administration's recent modernization strategy was solid on network modernization, shared services, and cyber, but light on tackling these most challenging modernization efforts. CIOs with average tenures of 2 years don't always focus on these longer-term, challenging legacy systems, which is even more reason for OMB to drive this. We have a review underway where we are identifying and profiling these legacy systems most in need of modernization. In conclusion, the American Tech Council, the Office of Innovation, and the modernization strategy are all positive developments. Now we need more action and implementation from OMB and agencies. Key focus areas should be on fixing CIO authorities in the IT workforce, regarding acquisitions, incremental development, CIO alignment with acquisitions, and the focus on our nation's top acquisitions is needed. On the operations side, data center optimization and mission-critical legacy modernization need continued attention. Finally, the Comptroller General held a forum with prior federal and agency CIOs from previous administrations in late 2016 to explore what has worked over the years in federal IT. The results of this forum are summarized on page 10 of my written statement, are consistent with the comments here this afternoon, and highlight the critical role OMB leadership plays. Mr. Chairman, again, thank you for your oversight of federal IT.
Thanks for being an important partner on this. And I misspoke. I apologize. Everybody has 5 minutes. So, Ms. Weichert, you're now up for your 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's great to be here on Pi Day to talk about this important subject. So Chairman Hurd, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the subcommittees, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the state of federal information technology in 2018. In December, in testifying before the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, I discussed the range of disciplines that the Deputy Director for Management is charged with overseeing, including IT, information security, human capital management, finance, accounting, performance management, and procurement. Today, as the newly sworn-in Deputy Director for Management, I'm working with our agency partners to drive necessary improvement in those disciplines, and I'm excited to talk about one of those areas, IT modernization, in depth. Improving our technology infrastructure is fundamental to aligning the executive branch to the mission, service, and stewardship needs of the 21st century. To that end, next week, we will release the President's Management Agenda, the PMA, an agenda which places IT modernization at its core. The PMA sets out a long-term vision for more effective government that better achieves missions and enhances the key services upon which the American people depend. IT modernization must provide the essential background and backbone of the government service delivery while keeping sensitive data and systems secure. And the President's Management Agenda also links to related critical issues associated with data accountability and transparency, as well as the people and workforce for the 21st century. Since the establishment of the Office of E-Government and Information Technology in 2002, OMB has played a pivotal role in formulation of IT policy and strategic direction across the federal government. The Office of the Federal CIO, the Chief Information Security Office of the U.S., and the United States Digital Service are all in my organization, and together these groups leverage the convening authorities of OMB, including the CIO Council and the CISO Council, to coordinate executive branch IT modernization activities. In addition, since 2014, U.S. Digital Service has been focused on improving and transforming the experience of Americans who interact with government online. This means that more citizens can easily and seamlessly access government services online due to more secure identity proofing. It means veterans are receiving appeals responses in a more timely manner. It has enhanced Medicare claims processing, allowing citizens to access health data online. And USDS has also helped make it easier for small businesses to compete for government contracts and for acquisition officers to be better positioned to acquire commercial technology. Ultimately, all this work is part of a broader strategy to help rebuild Americans' trust in government. Today, I look forward to talking with you about a range of IT modernization initiatives, including the IT Modernization Report, the Modernizing Government Technology Act, Federal Cybersecurity Policy, agency IT transformation activities, including the work of U.S. Digital Service, and the IT workforce of the future, to name a few areas. More detailed background on many of these topics is included in my written testimony for the record. And in closing, OMB looks forward to working with the Oversight and Government Reform Committee and with Congress broadly on IT modernization. Over the years, this Oversight Committee has been instrumental in driving federal IT modernization through its role in developing legislation such as FATARA, the Data Act, and the MGT Act. Through our collaborative efforts, I know we will be able to improve government services and cybersecurity. I thank the subcommittees for holding this hearing and for your commitment to IT modernization. I will be pleased to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Zielinski. You're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Great. Good afternoon. Chairman Hurd, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Bill Zielinski, and I'm the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Information Technology category in GSA's Federal Acquisition Service. In addition, I also serve as the Office of Management and Budget appointed government-wide IT category manager. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss the important role GSA plays in federal information technology efforts government-wide. The IT category at GSA enables agencies in the acquisition of $50 billion in goods and services annually from more than 20,000 industry partners. ITC's top priority is to maximize customer value and mission productivity. And while GSA brings significant capabilities to the table in facilitating the modernization of the federal government's IT infrastructure and applications, it's through the strategic partnerships with other agencies and our industry partners where we will make the greatest progress. For instance, I work closely with OMB's Office of Federal Procurement Policy and Administrator of the Office of Electronic Government to review the federal IT spend, determine where opportunities exist to collaborate on the acquisition of IT products and services, and implement strategies to get more value from IT dollars. In that vein, I would now like to discuss 4 key ways in which GSA is supporting the modernization of the federal government's IT infrastructure and applications. First, in December, the American Technology Council issued its final report to the President on federal IT modernization. The report is the culmination of a months-long process to develop a strategic plan that improves the security posture of federal IT and incorporates feedback from industry and members of the public. The report has 3 key objectives that will inform future efforts: to reduce the federal attack surface through enhanced application and data level protections, to improve visibility beyond the network level, and to ensure that policy, resource allocation, acquisition, and operational approaches to security enable the use of new technology without sacrificing reliability or performance. GSA is directly tasked in whole or in part with half of the 50 action items recommended by the report and is actively working on these deliverables in accordance with report timelines. Second, the MGT Act is another critical tool for modernizing federal IT. GSA thanks the members of these subcommittees for their dedication to getting this legislation passed. GSA is tasked with several key actions related to the MGT's Technology Modernization Fund. Chief among them is providing broad support for the Technology Modernization Board's activities, including technical support and the monitoring of agencies that receive funds from the TMF. Subject to appropriations, GSA is prepared to help administer this critically important fund. Third, in partnership with the White House Office of American Innovation, GSA is working to establish 5 new centers of excellence. The COEs will house centralized function-specific talent, products, and acquisition vehicles. These teams will provide expert advice, development resources, and support solution implementation in the areas of cloud adoption, IT infrastructure optimization, customer experience, service delivery analytics, and contact centers. The first client agency for the COEs is the United States Department of Agriculture. Finally, GSA is helping agencies adopt new approaches for buying commercial, off-the-shelf, and as-a-service solutions. By leading the development of modular contracting approaches to enable agile and efficient development of complex new requirements, we're able to assist agencies through the entire life cycle of procurement and system development. Through GSA's unique mix of talent and expertise in acquisition, technology, and service delivery, combined with our government-wide scope and scale, makes our agency an agent of transformation in how agencies will buy, build, and use technology. I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss GSA's role, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, and Ms. Manford, you're now recognized for 5 minutes of your opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Hurd, Ranking Member Kelly, members of the committee. Thank you for today's opportunity to discuss the Department of Homeland Security's efforts to secure federal networks. I would like to begin my testimony by thanking Congress for its work on the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency Act of 2017. If enacted, this legislation will streamline the National Protection and Programs Directorate, or NPPD, and rename our organization to more clearly reflect our central role in government and private sector critical infrastructure security. Much progress has been made, but we must stay focused until this work is complete. The Department strongly supports this effort and encourages swift action by Congress. Cyber threats remain one of the most significant strategic risks for the United States, threatening our national security, economic prosperity, and public health and safety. Over the past year, federal network defenders saw the threat landscape grow more crowded, active, and dangerous. While in many cases our defenses have been successful in mitigating these threats, we must do more to ensure our cyber defenses keep pace of technological change and evolving risk. In my role at DHS, I head the Office of Cybersecurity and Communications. A core part of my role is protecting and managing the overall information security of federal civilian networks. To do this, we must first gain visibility to understand the exposure that the federal enterprise faces. Then we need to use our authorities to reduce this risk, whether that's through directives, guidance, or direct support to agencies. And finally, we must build capacity within agencies to implement our guidance, act on threat information, and fully leverage the capabilities and services that DHS has to offer. Programs like the National Cyber Protection System and Einstein and the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program directly serve and enable these 3 lines of effort. Last year, the President signed an executive order on strengthening the cybersecurity of federal networks and critical infrastructure, which set in motion a series of assessments and deliverables to improve our defenses and lower our risk to cyber threats. Across the federal government, agencies have been implementing the NIST cybersecurity framework. Agencies have been reporting to DHS and OMB on their cybersecurity risk mitigation and acceptance choices. DHS and OMB have evaluated the totality of these agencies' reports in order to comprehensively assess the federal government's cybersecurity risk management posture. The assessment found the federal enterprise to be at risk. The choices we make to reduce this risk in both cybersecurity budget and operational priorities must be informed by a data-driven, risk-based assessment of federal cybersecurity and the threat environment. As part of the executive order, my office has been working with OMB, GSA, and federal agencies to modernize the federal government's IT infrastructure. We are exploring opportunities to consolidate network architectures, embrace shared IT services, all the while emphasizing cybersecurity as a foundational element to all new IT services. We recognize that legacy IT systems present considerable challenges in efforts to secure federal networks. The risks posed by these antiquated, end-of-life systems has perhaps best been demonstrated by the difficulties agencies face in complying with DHS's binding operational directives, which govern vulnerability patching. Some legacy systems can no longer be patched, others are not supported by vendors, and some experience significant performance issues if not reconfigured during the security upgrade process. While in most cases, DHS and the agencies have been able to address these issues and either upgrade, transition, or mitigate the problem entirely, this complicates and adds cost to agency efforts to patch their own systems, an exercise that does need to be as painless as possible. While the use of more modern IT has efficiencies and convenience of its own, the benefits it brings to cybersecurity efforts are also significant. My organization works with departments and agencies to identify and prioritize high-value assets or those systems for which a cyber incident could cause significant impact to the United States. We conduct security architecture reviews to assess network architectures and configurations, and conduct in-depth vulnerability assessments which determine how an adversary could compromise these systems, persist in their networks, and gain access to sensitive data. These assessments provide system owners with recommendations to address identified vulnerabilities and assist them in prioritizing their limited resources to fix the worst things first. In closing, I want to assure this committee that DHS is embracing our statutory responsibility to administer the implementation of federal agency cybersecurity policies and practices by leading the effort to secure the federal enterprise in coordination with my partners on the panel following a risk-based approach. This committee played a key role in championing the passage of FISMA 2014 and clarifying these important authorities for DHS, and we thank you for those. The overarching goal of federal cybersecurity is to ensure that every agency maintains an adequate level of cybersecurity commensurate with its own risk and those of the federal enterprise. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you. Now, it's a pleasure to recognize the gentleman from Montana for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panel. Mr. Powner, it's good to see you again. It seems like you're here monthly, and I appreciate your help in moving forward the IT procurement. Mr. Zielinski, I would like to dive in a little bit in the GSA's role in procurement, particularly as it relates to shared services. Could you talk a little bit about, to help the committee, what are shared services and what do you see as the benefits of mandating those for agencies where appropriate?
So in the broadest sense, shared services is an opportunity for us to, rather than having each agency independently build out a capability set, to be able to build those out in a centralized way. It could be that it is a government-operated, government-built shared service, or it could be that it is a commercially offered solution. In working with the Office of Management and Budget, as well as with our own Unified Shared Services Management Office, we are working to develop a series of shared services along the lines of business. There's a lot of opportunities and benefits to this approach. First of all, there's significant cost savings. Secondly, as we talk about the security posture, that ability for us to protect the shared service and be able to make changes to that individual or that one shared service and have all of the participants benefit across the government is significant.
Okay. And what IT services are already being procured under a shared services model?
Oh, so there are a number. What I would like to offer is to be able to bring the full list, but I'll give you some examples here today.
Please.
For one, we have a shared service offering that's in and around the implementation or the issuance of the PIV credentials, the HSPD 12 PIV credentials, that is operated out of GSA. There are 110 customer agencies with more than 750,000 credentials under active management. That's an example of a very mature shared service that is utilized across government. There's shared infrastructure for agencies to be able to go to common issuance sites. In addition, there are shared services for payroll, shared services for financial services, and we continue to build out other shared services. And again, I will bring back a more complete list of what those shared service offerings are.
So it sounds like shared services allow us to standardize procurement in such a way that various agencies don't have to roll their own, so to speak.
Correct.
Yeah. So there's cost savings. You mentioned earlier $50 billion of annual procurement. If shared services were fully implemented where appropriate, how big is the size of the prize in terms of savings?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that. I think that as we are now going through the different lines of business and identifying those opportunities for shared services, we'll have a much better or more complete picture of what those savings opportunities are.
In instances where you have used shared services, how much savings resulted?
It differs based upon the service itself. And again, what I can do is bring back some more explicit information for each of these shared services as to where that is.
Okay, so cost savings are one benefit. What impact does it have on security when a service is shared versus implemented individually by the agencies?
So I would like to start, and I would also like to ask my partner, Ms. Manfra, to also add in as well. One of the things that we're able to do is that as each individual agency is building out a capability, that means that those individual agencies are also responsible for ensuring that they are patching and kind of doing the basic blocking and tackling that's necessary to secure the capability, and that if there is something that happens within the overall system that they have to respond to, that also means that they each individually would have to do that. In a shared services instantiation, we have where there is a central group who is managing that security posture of the shared service, and that means that when there is something that occurs or there is a need for us to make a change or to address a vulnerability, we are able to do that once, and it is addressed for all of the customers of that.
So, and again, I want to go back to my prior question. I realize you want to go collect more data, and I do want an accurate answer, but it seems like shared services presents an opportunity to standardize procurement, limit variability, increase security, and lower cost, all of which are good objectives. Where is shared services on your priority list as you're working with agencies on procurement?
So I will say that going back to the IT modernization report, this is one of the core principles within the President's IT modernization report is for us to look for those opportunities to build out shared services, to be able to both speed the modernization, but also to increase the protection. So it is one of the core priorities in moving forward with modernization.
Final question. Who should be managing these shared services within the government?
The plan as it stands today is to look for managing partners based upon the capability areas. So dependent upon what the business function or area is, that there is a role for the appropriate agency. So in the case of HR shared services, OPM would have a significant role as an example.
So then they could be a service provider to other agencies if necessary?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ranking Member Kelly.
Thank you. The growing rate of sophisticated data breaches and cyber attacks in the private and public sector have heightened concerns over the security and strength of federal IT systems. And some of these devastating attacks succeed because federal systems are dangerously outdated and obsolete. And I mentioned in my opening statement that nearly 75% of the federal government's IT budget is dedicated toward maintaining legacy computer systems. Mr. Powner, why does it take such a large share to maintain those systems?
Well, I think historically, operational systems in the federal government get a pass. So when you look at that's something, the lights are on and it's running and we're serving the mission. We might not be serving the mission efficiently. We might not be serving the mission securely, but it's gotten a pass over the years. That's been the biggest problem. I think this committee, going back to 2016 when we did the big report with the 8-inch floppy disk at DOD, helped raise the issue of how old and insecure and costly these systems are. And we're starting to make progress. The problem is we still need firm dates to replace these systems where we actually turn them off. I mean, I agree with all the comments that it's difficult to maintain and patch. There's unsupported software, but ultimately the security solution is turning them off and decommissioning them.
And not trying to be comical, but because the systems are so old, do we even have the staff? We talk about the staff for the new systems and in the workforce, but what about the staff to maintain these systems?
So it's very difficult. I know personally I do a lot of detailed work at IRS, and when you start looking at assembly programmers there, we're losing them left and right. We pay a premium to contractors to maintain. We pay other younger programmers who know modern languages, retention. It costs money to maintain these systems, and each year we go on, it costs more and more, and we become more and more insecure.
And what happens if we just turn it off?
Well, right now, we need a lot of these mission-critical systems to actually do the mission. You know, the IMF system at IRS, that's where we get $3.3 trillion in revenue through tax returns. It's critical. Chairman Hurd's held hearings on the VA VISTA system. I mean, we still need that to apply medical services to our veterans. But again, that's, you know, that's why we need to keep them running, because they're mission-critical.
Okay, thank you. The Modernizing Government Technology Act is a key component of this administration's continued effort to improve federal technology by providing financial resources and technical expertise to agencies. Does the MGT Act continue to be, you think, a priority for the Trump administration and OMB?
Hitting talk button. The MGT Act and the Technology Modernization Fund are absolutely priorities for the administration, and we've actually pulled together in the President's Management Agenda, which will be released next week and was hinted at in the President's budget in February, a holistic perspective on how we tackle these issues, which is not purely the technology pieces, as you have mentioned. It includes issues around data and data structure. It also includes very critical people issues. We want to solve these issues holistically, build on past successes, and we believe that the MGT and the Technology Modernization Fund will be great stepping stones toward the future of really pulling all of these dimensions together so that they're not siloed by function, where, you know, we have CIOs, you know, who, by the way, need more authority, and you all have done great work in FITARA to do that, and we support that. But we also need the human capital element, the financial element, the procurement element to be at the same table. And so what we're laying out in the President's management agenda is that holistic framework. It was why I was so eager to actually be here and share, because one of the root cause observations that we had when we looked at how government was tackling these issues versus the private sector, it was that lack of integration across function, and we plan to tackle that, leveraging these authorities that Congress has provided through the MGT Act and TMF. And by the way, we really hope the appropriators actually fund the TMF.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Powner, can you comment on the steps that OMB is taking?
Well, I think clearly the guidance that OMB just put out, you know, that's the right direction, and that guidance was very solid. You know, now the hard part is implementation. You know, we're really good at plans and guidance in this town, but we're not always good at getting things done and implementing them completely. So let's do this right with the MGT Act, because we got savings out there, as Mr. Zielinski said, with shared services, or we're still with some data centers. We can populate those working capital funds and really do MGT right.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Blum, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Hurd. Thank you to our panelists for being here today. Mr. Powner, your challenge is in the next 5 minutes to make me an expert on cloud computing. Cloud computing's been in the news lately with the federal government. Department of Defense, I think, is looking at going to cloud computing. I assume the entire government will be there at some point. Can you talk to me about the efforts to go to cloud computing, A? B, financially, is that going to save the taxpayers money or not? And C, I'm particularly interested in the following, and that is, will it be more secure or less secure, or perhaps the same level of security that we have today not being in the cloud?
So there's all kinds of various aspects of the cloud. So like, for instance, on our data center situation we have, when I say that some agencies by 2020 should get out of the business of data centers, that's because we have inefficient data centers that they're not going to optimize, maybe 2/3 of them. And what we could do there is we could host our existing applications in a cloud environment or on servers and infrastructure maintained by contractors who are cloud providers. So that's one way that we could actually have more save money and have optimized data centers by actually outsourcing all of it to the cloud. We can also, too, in some of the shared service areas that we talked about, you can actually buy software as a service in the cloud from many of these cloud providers, and that's another way for where we can save money. However, there are some of these mission-critical applications, like some of these homegrown systems that are critical to agencies' mission, that you're not going to find that as a software as a service, that we got to actually just do the hard work and convert those old systems. So cloud, there's a great opportunity. It's not the solution for everything, but there's substantial savings. And from a security perspective, you know, if you really look, the Intel community kind of led the cloud migration. We were concerned on the civilian side about having enough security. So if it's good enough for Intel, it's probably good enough for a lot of others. The other thing you could do is through your contracting provisions, and we did work on this, looking at service level agreements and contracts, you can specify the level of security you want from those cloud providers and actually dictate the level of security. So in many ways, cloud services can be more secure than what we currently have.
Do you think all federal IT should eventually end up in the cloud?
There's some aspects that won't be in the cloud because they're unique to agency missions, but there's a large portion that could end up being in the cloud. But there are these pockets of unique applications that we do that no one else has, that we have to do the hard work and convert those to more modern platforms and modern software.
Where are we at today in this journey to the cloud?
So that's a good question. We're doing some work for this committee where we've done prior works, and we try to measure it as a percentage of budget or IT spend, and it's very difficult. You know, we did this work a couple years ago where agencies varied from 2 to 7% of their IT budgets were in the cloud. That's improved somewhat, but it's very difficult to give you a good hard number right now. We're working on that for this committee.
Thank you. Ms. Weigert, is it?
Yes.
OMB, how involved are they in this migration to the cloud?
So it's it's a great question, and it is actually one of the priorities that we're laying out as part of the President's management agenda. Now that the federal CIO is in place, it is on her top priority list, and we're working closely with GSA and the Centers of Excellence on the implementation. They've already met to put together tiger teams in terms of cloud email adoption, and they're looking at other areas where commercially available solutions are already in place, secure, and working at some agencies to elevate the lessons from those and extend them across government. But ultimately, the test to the question that you asked earlier around which things should migrate to the cloud, it's essentially going to be dependent on the mission, the service aspects, so how well we can serve the needs of our citizens and the American people, and then the stewardship aspects of financial stewardship. So we're really going to be looking at balancing those three items.
Thank you. Mr. Zielinski, I hope I pronounced that right. This is kind of interesting, the Centers of Excellence. Can you just briefly tell me about that and that effort?
Certainly. Thank you for the question. Going back to some of the things that Mr. Powner mentioned, as agencies are making these decisions about their strategies for moving to the cloud or considering the cloud, the Centers of Excellence are places where we bring together technical expertise, the engineers and others who understand the dynamics of matching those business applications and those business functions to where they best lend themselves to a cloud application, whether that's software as a service or platform as a service, and then help agencies define acquisition strategies for them to be able to move. So there's a lot of direct assistance that those Centers of Excellence provide to a customer agency, and they do that through bringing together the expertise, as Ms. Weigert said, being able to make sure that we have all of those functions working hand in glove, the technical expertise, as well as the acquisition.
Is it more of a planning function or more of an execution function?
It is absolutely.
Centers of Excellence.
It's absolutely an execution function, sir.
I agree with what Mr. Pounder said earlier about we're good at planning, not so good at following through. Thank you very much. I'm out of time, and I yield back.
Now recognize the ranking member.
I just have one quick question, and not for Mr. Powner, but how long, excuse my voice, how long have all of you been in your positions you're in now?
I was appointed in June of last year, ma'am.
I've been with GSA for 2 years.
in the position you're in now?
6 months.
The Senate confirmed me on Valentine's Day of this year.
It's all relative newbies, okay. No insult to you, I just knew you'd been around. Thank you.
He's been there forever, I think is the right answer. Now, Mr. Zielinski, can we follow up on the Centers of Excellence? I recognize myself for 5 minutes. How does this program differ from 18F?
So thank you for the question, sir. The 18F has those technical experts that the Centers of Excellence can actually tap into. So as I talked about bringing together the different discipline areas to be able to bring to bear on a particular agency problem set and to assist them in being able to understand the dynamics of their business case and how they can move forward, 18F as an organization would be one of the areas into which the Centers of Excellence can reach to bring that technical expertise to the table.
Gotcha. And how do we ensure these Centers of Excellence, other than having GAO white glove it, how do we ensure that these don't duplicate efforts that are going on in the rest of the government?
Going back to the agenda that has been laid out by the administration in and around, starting with the IT modernization report, as well as with the president's management agenda, it's a very tight weave in terms of ensuring that there's a collaboration across all those functional areas. And there are many opportunities for those functional areas to be brought together to ensure that we are all bringing to bear the best talent and that we're also not duplicating efforts, sir.
Good copy. Ms. Weicker, one of the things that is still frustrating, and I'm glad Mr. Pauner alluded to this in the beginning of his remarks, is CIO authorities. Mm-hmm. We can't hold CIOs accountable if we don't give them all the power they need. And we still, FTARA gives them that authority, but in many places, the agency CIO doesn't have the complete budget authority of that entire operation. And transportation is an example. Right? I think they have 9 CIOs, people with Title IX CIOs, $3 billion plus budget. Can we reprogram the funds from those various sub-CIOs under the agency CIO in order to streamline that budget authority?
So not being an expert on appropriations, I want to caveat and say that I would love to answer that in more detail after conferring with some of our budget folks. But what I can say is absolutely agree with your frustration. It's something we in the administration share and are looking very closely at how do we address. I think in the president's management agenda, we are laying out how all of the components of the various authorities across government, how they work together and how they align together, and to avoid duplication while giving the maximum elevated level of capability to the CIOs. I think the Technology Modernization Fund and the MGT in providing new capabilities around working capital funds, that is a place we are going to start and are already exploring ways that we can work with agencies to help them focus and target resources towards the highest priority projects, as Mr. Pauner has suggested. In terms of getting additional capabilities, I think the authorities are different in terms of transfer and how they can use their working capital funds that I wouldn't want to give you a across-the-board answer.
But would you have heartburn if we worked to reprogram some of these to ensure that the agency CIO had all the budget authority for IT spend across that network?
So I haven't studied that specific issue,
Okay.
but what I
answer.
can say is we're absolutely in alignment in terms of the idea that the CIO for the broad agency needs to have all the capabilities and tools to make these very profound investments. And the more we can align to the way the private sector works, where you've got a general manager of a division or an agency, and they're their C-suite includes the chief information officer, the chief financial officer, the chief people officer, and where appropriate, the procurement officer. They need to all be there in lockstep.
And the CIO, I think you said that.
I said that first,
Okay,
yeah.
first, okay, gotcha.
And
Look,
that's key.
I agree, and look, my teams will get mad because we're talking about how do we change the FATARA scorecard to penalize agencies that don't have the federal CIO reporting directly to the agency or deputy agency head. We've asked everybody, why? What's going on? Why is that the case? We've gotten a lot of excuses. Oh, it's kind of already there. Well, if it's already there, then change the damn structure. And so we are looking at having that be reflective in the FATARA scorecard. Ms. Pownter, do you have any opinions on the reprogramming and getting complete budget authority to the CIO?
Well, first of
Let me
all,
rephrase that, the CIO, not the CIA. Okay? Don't want everybody to get mad and run an ad against me.
but I think the first step is that we understand all the IT spend as a whole. I think many CIOs, we don't even know the full totality of what we spend at these departments and agencies. So once we understand that, I do think that CIOs should control that more. It's okay, too, if there's some business units that control it and they act in partnership, where the CIO is working with those business units to spend it appropriately, to oversee it the right way, and that. So I think there's probably even some blend. I think right now, if we did it completely whole hog, you have complete budget authority, the whole bit, I don't know if that would, maybe we need to shock the system as you're intending. That's one way to do it. But the other way to do it
Your
is
words,
to have
not
some,
mine,
some,
sir.
some type of blend where we know the entire spend, and the CIO has a role, whether they control every dollar or not, but they're still responsible for governing over it. We got too much IT spend that we don't have IT people on it.
You reminded me of something I was going to ask, and Ms. Weichert, this may not be something on the top of your mind, or Mr. Zielinski, I think this is outside of your scope. Department of Defense recently made the decision to not publish their IT amount. I believe it was in a recent, it was an O&B report? What was it? It was in the analytical prospectus. The analytical prospectus. It said, hey, we're going to stop showing DOD's number on IT along with everyone else. So we went from the federal government spending $90 billion to $40 billion. And they said, asterisk FY18, it was roughly $50 billion. Do you have any insight into that decision, that process? And we will be bringing, again, not to show our hand, but we'll be bringing DOD for the next FATARA scorecard hearing to have them answer that directly. But I'd welcome your thoughts.
Yeah, unfortunately, that was prior to my being confirmed, so I wasn't read in on that particular decision.
When you're talking to them,
I will
tell them this
note it.
committee is interested.
I will share that.
And I'd love to have the answer prior to. Should I introduce these into the record? So this was the analysis in this chapter excludes the Department of Defense and classified spending, which in FY 2008 was $42.5 billion, or 44% of the IT budget. So we're going to start showing only 66% of the budget as a whole number, which seems a little odd to me. Ms. Manfra, one of the things I want to do with the FATARA scorecard is transition it into more of a digital hygiene scorecard as well. I think the elements as Mr. Pownter has talked about, we got to continue to double down on those issues. But I think being able to highlight at the macro level good digital hygiene is important. I think the inclusion of the Megabyte Act on that was one of that. Do you know all the software that's running on your system? And I think only 3 were able to answer yes, right, which is pretty shocking. And again, these are self-reporting numbers. So what are some of the areas that you think that we should or could be exploring when it comes to digital hygiene and how we look across that over the entire enterprise?
So I think, first of all, I think that's a great idea to include that, frankly, shining a light on some of these basic practices. has been useful in agencies prioritizing. So I briefly alluded to critical vulnerability patching. What we saw through years of assessments was just continued poor patch management programs. Some of that does have to do with legacy systems and all of that, but what we decided to issue our first binding operational directive was actually to require the time to patch a critical vulnerability down to 30 days. And the important way, though, that we were able to be successful, I think, with this and with other directives and other guidance that we provide is that we can independently validate. We're not relying on self-reporting. And so the more capabilities that DHS is deploying, in this case, it's the external scanning that we're doing of all internet-facing devices that we can say, no, I can see that you haven't actually patched. The good news story is that when we, I think FY14 average time to patch was somewhere in excess of 200 days for critical vulnerabilities, which is bad. After the directive, and it continues, which shows how these things change behavior, we're averaging in the 10 to 15 days. And so it's helping them prioritize their very limited resources by focusing on known issues, and that's what we want to continue to do, but it's also important that we can independently validate this. You talked about knowing what software on your system. So the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program that we've been deploying, the first phase is hardware and software asset management, and we've learned a lot through that program in what agencies thought they had on their network was not exactly what we found that they had on their network after deploying these. And I know in one sense it's frustrating to sort of be in that environment, but at least we're in a position now where we know what's connected to the network, and as we deploy more tools, and as a side note, this program actually is also very cost effective, and we've been able to identify that I think it's 75% cost savings off a schedule if they had bought these on Schedule 70. So we're deploying common tools that are identifying what and who is on networks, and I believe that this will fundamentally transform the way that we do, in the first case, vulnerability management for the government, but eventually we will get to event management and ongoing authorization and those programs. But it has to be through the deployment of these standardized tools that then feed data back to an agency CIO and DHS so that we can, through automated sensors, understand where they are.
Would you have security concerns of publishing that number of how long it takes to patch software, like the average that takes to patch software from agency?
I don't know how.
You can take time to think about it.
Yeah.
It's just, I think that's an element that self-reporting, we can establish a letter grade based on, what is industry best practices. Is a week a is,
15
200 days. 200 days is definitely an F,
Right.
Where that's something that we could package and keep track of and make sure that we're continuing to shine a light on.
Absolutely, sir. And there's a few other things that we've identified as very common practices that we're focusing our guidance on, and we'd be happy to work with you on how we can improve those practices.
And before we get to the gentleman from the Commonwealth of Virginia, my last question is, one of the things that I've 3.5 years we've been doing this together, we've asked a lot of questions about, are you doing technical vulnerability assessments, penetration testing, and a lot of agencies have said yes, and then you find out after the fact they're just doing a scan, right? That they're not bringing in a third-party system, a third-party vendor to come in and do that testing. Your organization has been doing that. Have you seen an increase in that as a best practice?
So you're right, there isn't a very common definition of what people mean by penetration testing. As I noted, we do passive scanning, but that is to identify one set of issues. We also do our risk and vulnerability assessments, which is penetration testing, which is actively going and trying to identify and exploit vulnerabilities. That's what we would consider. We haven't previously taken statistics on what agencies are using penetration testing. I can tell you that just in the last fiscal year, we did 42. We prioritize high-value assets, so we go through all of the high-value assets to do a full risk and vulnerability assessment, which includes a penetration test as well as a report to them. But we could definitely follow up on that.
Well, we'll be asking the agencies this question, so when we collect that information, we'll share it with you.
Thank you, sir.
So that you're aware. Now, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from the Commonwealth of Virginia, the ranking member, Mr. Conley.
I thank my friend, and welcome to our panel. And thank you both to Mr. Hurd and Ms. Kelly for their leadership of this subcommittee and on the subject matter. We're really fortunate to have members who care about the subject matter and delve into it. It's actually rare. You'd think more members would be involved in IT, but they actually aren't for various necessary reasons. And so one of the great pleasures of serving on this committee is that Mr. Meadows is not here, but the four of us have really worked seamlessly in a nonpartisan way to try to help rationalize federal IT policy. And I think for all four of us, it doesn't matter whether it's a Democrat or a Republican administration, we want it to work. So in that spirit, welcome. Ms. Weichert, in March of last year, White House announced the Office of American Innovation. And after that, OAI was credited with a whole bunch of projects as large as pushing the overhaul at the Veterans Administration healthcare IT system, setting the policy for federal government's adoption of AI, and presumably implementation of FTAR, data center consolidation, move into the cloud, empowerment of CIOs, and so forth. Now, under the E-Government Act of 2002, normally that role would be played by the federal CIO. Now that presumably we're going to have a federal CIO, what is OAI's role going forward, and how does OMB play a role in all of this as well?
I think it's a great question, and we are working in lockstep across the administration to set out a focused agenda for all the elements around not only IT modernization, but the other enabling capabilities around data, transparency, and accountability, as well as the people dimensions of that. And OAI did a great job providing catalytic capabilities in getting a lot of these activities started. But what's been included in the President's budget in February and what will be rolled out next week in the President's management agenda is the comprehensive go-forward plan. We do have a federal CIO, an outstanding leader from the private sector who has done execution of change in complex, highly regulated environments in the financial services and other industries, who's really here to help continue to carry that torch. I think a lot of the activities that have been enabled by the MGT Act and the TMF are stood up. The federal CIO actually met earlier this week with the members of the IT Modernization Fund Board, and they did a dry run so that when the appropriations come, I'm hoping they're coming soon, that the board will be prepared to act quickly. We continue to work very closely with OAI in terms of helping shape the strategy and bring to bear the best thinking of the administration, and also marshal resources outside of government to provide insights that might be helpful in our journey. But we in OMB are really leading the direction with the President's management agenda and bringing the executive branch along. And I look forward to having you all get to see what we're putting together that's going to be in the PMA launch next week.
So I know the chairman talked about maybe broadening the current FTAR scorecard at some point to a digital hygiene scorecard. Now, I would be supportive of that once we make more substantial progress on implementation of what's in front of us, because we've seen some backsliding with, DOD, the big kahuna got an F. And so we want to see more progress, but we can't really see it without leadership coming from your office. I assume, well, let me ask, you are committed to the metrics set in the law, FATARA, and the tools allowing us to try to facilitate that MGT, just passed into law, also gives agencies to facilitate implementation of the law. I assume you're trying to push agencies to meet the metrics set for them in the law.
Absolutely, and I think the focus historically, that has been very siloed. In a lot of cases, some of the challenges around FATARA implementation and some of the things measured in the scorecard hit root cause issues that were underlying those things. In a lot of cases, people issues are part of the problem. In some cases,
Yes.
Data and even the ability to see the problem is part of it. So part of what we want to do is actually use the broad management table to really shine a light on those issues. And to the extent the scorecard needs to evolve or mature, we'd be very happy to take input from GAO and work with Congress on that. But we are very supportive of the spirit of FATARA and moving forward with that. And I guess the last thing I'll just say is my perspective in the private sector. If you've got a broad failing to meet the needs outlined in a strategic plan or a set of metrics, it's incumbent upon the person who's accountable for those, and especially if it's me, to really understand, are there root cause issues that are preventing us from doing that, and then addressing those as well.
Yep. I couldn't agree with you more. And like you, I come from the private sector. I spent 20 years as a corporate officer, and what I learned in the private sector and the public sector is if the boss doesn't care, neither do I.
Right.
I'll give it lip
I care.
service. I'll
I
say,
care a
"Oh,
lot."
yes, exactly." But they need to feel pressure. They need to know I'm going to be evaluated by the boss on implementation, on meeting those metrics. And the other thing, and then I'll be quiet, but with respect to personnel, we've got to empower. In Latin, we call it primus inter pares, the first among equals in CIOs. There has to be a primus CIO who's got the responsibility, the accountability, and the power to make decisions. They've got to be empowered, and everyone has to know that. If the CIO of an agency is reporting to the deputy assistant grommet in the basement, that does not escape the attention of everybody else. And I might give lip service, but I know he or she doesn't really have the boss's attention. We elevate the issue, we elevate the role of that person and the stature of that person, we elevate the issue and its importance in everybody's eyes. And I think I commend that to you as a reform. It doesn't cost a lot of money, but I think it would have a profound effect on performance and would save a lot of money for agencies over time and make us a lot more effective. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. And I failed to spend some time on MGT, so I have a few questions, and Ms. Weichert, they're probably best for you. The agencies are still planning to present their implementation plans of the MGT Working Capital Fund. It's the 27th of March. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And will you be able to share those with us?
So we will be able to share the status on the working capital funds early this summer. So we are actively working with the agencies to understand what specifically their needs are in terms of implementing on that. So we already have a number that are well on the way of implementing it. We have identified some challenges related to transfer authorities that we need to work out, and we'll actually be coming back to Congress with some thoughts about ways to streamline what's needed to actually make it work as intended in the legislation. But we will be coming back.
The sooner you come to us on that, we'll do everything we can to help, because I think it's important by the end of this fiscal year to have some money deposited in those funds at a handful of agencies.
We
to show that it's
absolutely
working,
agree.
right?
Yes,
Mr.
so
Pounder,
we-
do you think we can do that?
Definitely, definitely. And we'll continue to work with you. I know that's one of the things we want to focus on, the scorecard too, as we evolve that to look at the establishment of those MGT funds and the accountability, who's in charge of those and that type of thing?
Because if you are able to deposit money in your your MGT working capital fund, it shows a culture of modernization. And I think that's important to monitor and focus on. I'd like to thank our witnesses again for being here today. The hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks for any member to submit a written opening statement or questions for the record. And if there's no further business, without objection, the subcommittees stand adjourned.